Hi, hello. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the first episode of our grief education podcast, Beyond the Loss, Conversations in Grief Education and Healing. I am Shari Dworkin-Smith, and I am a certified grief educator, a psychic medium, and a hypnotherapist. I help people to navigate their individual grief journey by providing a safe space for people to share their feelings, along with sharing tools to help folks move through their grief in more meaningful ways, which can help lessen those giant impact waves of grief while still honoring the loss. I am not a mental health professional. I am not a therapist or a psychologist. I am a certified grief educator. And I'm honored to have been trained in one of the first cohorts of world-renowned grief expert David Kessler's grief education training certification. I've been doing this work for many years, and as a psychic and as a medium, it felt like a natural addition to my work. So when David created his exceptional program, I jumped at the opportunity to work with him. As a medium, I connect with our loved ones in spirit to facilitate communication and to remind folks of the continuity of the soul. Our loved ones aren't gone, they're just with us in different ways. And as a hypnotherapist, I help people overcome challenges in their lives, such as anxiety, fear, building self-confidence or self-esteem, smoking cessation, so many other things that can leave us feeling stuck in our lives. And as we go forward, I am happy to answer questions about the various things that I do. So our time together will not focus on mediumship. A bit of that might show up from time to time. Rather, this space is for anyone navigating the heartbreak of loss. Whatever kind of grief you're carrying, whether your grief is fresh, anticipatory, or something that you've carried with you for years, this is a place where we can talk about it. Together, we're going to create a safe space to talk about grief and loss and the ways that we can make our way through it. And I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful for you to be joining me on the journey. And I thank you for coming along. So let's get started. And of course, my eyes are watering today. As I mentioned before, I have been doing this work for a long time. And in my work as a medium and a grief educator and as a hypnotherapist, I talk to people every day who are dealing with grief. Some people are living with grief that they're not even aware of, and others have issues in their lives that they had no idea were even related to grief. We need to talk about these things. We need to learn that it's okay to talk about grief. It's okay to feel it. And by bringing these conversations into the light, we can lift and support each other and hopefully help non-grievers have a better understanding of what's going on and how they can help. We don't talk about grief. We're not taught about it. And most people have no idea what to say about it, especially to someone who's grieving. So many times I've been to a memorial service or funeral, and the one thing that I hear over and over again is, I don't know what to say, but. And I realize that we have a real need in our society to talk more openly about grief and loss, to help people know that it's okay to feel what you're feeling, that there's no wrong way to grieve, and how to support those around us with words and actions that help rather than making things worse. I think we may be able to agree that we're living in a time when many people are dealing with some kind of grief and loss on a daily basis. That's just an unfortunate fact of being alive. The world is loud. It's a complicated place, especially right now. And let's not forget that loads of people are still dealing with the consequences of the pandemic, either personally within their communities or really in various industries as well. And whatever your thoughts are on how all of that unfolded, we can't escape the reality that over 1 million people died in the United States alone. That's a massive uptick in the number of people suddenly dealing with grief over the last few years. And regardless of your beliefs or your politics, our country also has a huge problem with people dying from gun violence. We've got rising rates of domestic violence, job loss, increasing cancer diagnoses in people younger and younger, aging parents, depression, all of it. And all of it increases the number of people navigating some form of grief. That is something that affects everyone, individuals, families, whole communities. And at some point, some kind of grief is going to affect each and every one of us. We're taught as children how to tie our shoes, how to have good manners, say please and thank you. We're taught how to feel proud and encouraged and how to feel joy. We're directed and we're shown by our parents, hopefully, how to process our anger and feel shame and how to say we're sorry when we've done things wrong. But we're never taught how to handle sadness or grief. And so often it's couched in boys don't cry because that's a sign of weakness, or girls don't cry because it means we're over emotional or we can't be trusted, or. The emotion of grief and sadness seems like it's the only one in our current societal structure that it's not tolerated or permitted. It has no place in the conversation. In generations past, grievers, especially widows, were expected to hide themselves away so their grief would not be made public. They weren't allowed to be seen in public. Mirrors were covered in their homes, and they wore black so everyone knew who to avoid. They were expected to disappear. Grief has always been this thing to be hidden or shunned, to pretend it doesn't exist. And now we have a society with an overabundance of grief and no readily available tools to deal with it. We also have a very real mental health crisis going on in our country, and much of it can be traced back to unprocessed, unacknowledged, or unmanaged grief. So let's talk about it. Let's bring it out in the open. Let's lift each other up. Now, we're not going to be all bumming out every day, every week, but let's create a safe space of love and support. And let's share the stories. Let's acknowledge our grief, and let's create more I see you moments. Let's build the tools to help us move forward and to live in our grief. Grief is not something wrong with you that needs to be fixed. It's not a problem to be solved. It's something we learn to cohabitate with. It's something I hope we can learn to speak about, and something we can learn to honor together. I'm often asked to share the story of how I became a medium, and while I won't tell the whole story today, what I will share is that I've heard voices and been aware of other presences my whole life. And as a teen and in my college years, when it got super intense, I closed the doors and I pushed this connection away. Later, as an adult, I had reopened myself to the spiritual world, but I haven't yet decided what I was going to do with all of this. And it was after my dear friend Michael passed that this purpose in my life really came into focus. Michael was one of my best friends. When our children were born, we were mommy and me BFFs. And after he died, I like to say he became the biggest busybody in my life. From the other side, he understood my abilities and my path. And he used that to push me into service. He needed me to get a message to his spouse. Michael was persistent. He needed my help. And of course, I wanted to help my friend. On a visit back to Los Angeles, where we had lived for many years, I was able to connect with Paul, Michael's husband. When I delivered his message, Paul's whole demeanor changed, and I could see relief move through his body. His face, previously contorted into a pain-filled scowl, melted, and his shoulders relaxed, and he was finally able to let go of some of the grief. I had been able to help with the guilt, the helplessness, and the direct pain of his loss. And it was truly humbling to be able to help people I loved so much. But still, in that moment, I had no idea how to help him deal with the grief of living without his beloved partner when they had been side by side for more than 4 decades. A few days later, my mom mentioned that I seemed out of sorts. I told her I was still sad about Michael's passing, and it had been barely a week since the funeral. And she said, "You're still upset about that?" Her words hit me like a punch in the chest. And my mom is great, and I know she didn't mean any harm or offense. It was just a flip comment. And because Michael had not been a big part of her life, she likely had no idea of the pain that I felt. For millions of people, their understanding of grief is people crying in a church or next to a coffin or by a grave. Many people think that grief is what they see in the movies or on the news. And because it didn't affect them personally, they have little understanding of how it shows up or what it feels like, or what to say to someone who's dealing with it. That's why I'm here. And I hope through our time together, we can create a window in time each week where we can come together to be seen and heard and supported, and hopefully laugh a bit. Grief is not something we need to fix. It is something we need to bring out into the open and talk about and deal with together. I'll include links to the blog posts about my journey to becoming a medium and my story about Michael in the show notes in case you'd like to know more. I know from my own experiences how frustrating it is that there are so few resources available to people dealing with grief. And I will be sharing more of those as we go forward. Newscaster Anderson Cooper of CNN also has a podcast called All There Is. It's really a great listen. And he started it to help him deal with the passing of his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt. He realized he needed a way to process his grief, and finding few resources himself, a newscaster and journalist, he started reaching out to others that he knew had faced these difficult journeys as well. He recently interviewed documentarian Ken Burns, who said, "I think we've done ourselves an extraordinary disservice, not just at a social political level, but also at an intimate level, if we can't let loss and grief be part of our common language." And I believe he's right. As we go forward, we are going to hear from you as well. I want to hear what's going on, how you're doing, and to offer tools to support you as you navigate your own grief journey. Today, though, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the more common types of grief. You might want to jot some of these down or bookmark this episode so you can come back and listen again when you're not doing something else. But notice what comes into your mind as I go through each of these types of grief, and see if perhaps you've been holding on to something that maybe you didn't even realize was grief manifesting itself in your life in the first place. Our pain is trying to talk to us and to teach us and to help us to heal. And too often we're just taught to just get through it or push it aside. I can't deal with that right now, right? So if these feel familiar to you, some of them may not, and that's okay. Grief manifests itself differently for everyone. Some people sleep, some others experience insomnia, some overeat or undereat, have malaise, or they're short-tempered, or dealing with grief is as individual a process as the person experiencing it. And I think perhaps that's why there's not that many mental health professionals who choose to delve into it. It's complicated, it's hard, and it's definitely not something with a quick fix. It takes time. It takes the time it takes. And unfortunately, in our instant gratification society, people expect us to just get over it, and our grief, get over it in the time of a 24-hour news cycle. I want to clarify that grief isn't just something that happens when someone we care about dies. Grief can come to us for a host of reasons other than death. We can grieve the end of a relationship, a job, moving out of our home, and a pending loss, closing a chapter, and on and on. And even if these things are largely positive, we can still feel the effects of grief and sadness and loss. So this is just a quick synopsis of some of the more common types of grief that people may be facing. Unexpected grief is one of the more common things I talk with people about. For example, when my ex-brother-in-law passed away not that long ago, I was genuinely surprised by how much grief I felt. I never had a big brother, and while it lasted, it was great. The latter years were really difficult, and when he passed, I thought what I'd feel more than anything else was relief, but instead there was a strong sadness I hadn't truly expected. There's normal grief, though. To be honest, I don't really love this descriptor. Grief is normal, though each grief journey is unique and is unique to the people and the circumstances, and it should be treated that way. Anticipatory grief is often associated with an upcoming loss, perhaps from illness or age. We know something bad or hard is coming, and so we begin to steel ourselves against the pain ahead of time. We can fall into the grief as if the loss had already happened. Complicated grief can occur when the griefer does not move all the way through the steps of grief and may feel stuck in one aspect or another. Chronic grief can develop when intense reactions to loss don't subside over time. Strong emotions, of course, are normal, a normal part of grief. However, over time, they should decrease, at least in some ways. Time heals, as they say, and given time, the sharpness of initial grief should quiet itself a bit. Cumulative grief comes when we're dealing with thing after thing after thing, and it can feel like one thing after another piles on until we get to that proverbial last straw. Delayed grief is the stuff that hits us later on. For example, I was lucky enough to have my grandparents well into their 90s, and when they passed one after the other, I didn't cry at the time. But a few months later, we inherited their bedroom furniture, and when we set it all up, my tears and sadness came pouring out. Distorted grief can be intense or extreme, kind of misplaced reaction to loss. For example, when someone dies by suicide, those left behind may feel somehow responsible, like they should have known what was going on or been able to stop it from happening. And far too often, that's just not the truth of the situation. Exaggerated grief can show up, especially when we are just done. Our emotions are frayed and actions can become more frustrated or disruptive. In some situations, there can also be nightmares or self-destructive behavior. Secondary loss is the loss because of a loss. Perhaps you're no longer a caregiver, so there are things you no longer have to do or get to do. No longer visiting certain places or certain people. Loss can affect so many areas of our lives that we may not even realize it. Masked grief deals with those things that may not even look like grief at all, but they are. Exhaustion, mind fog, body pain, decreased or increased appetite, procrastination, even depression can all be part of grief. Disenfranchised grief may be where you feel your loss isn't being validated by others. One place we see that is when a celebrity passes unexpectedly and people have an extreme reaction. Others may question the level of anguish towards someone the griever may not have personally known. This same scenario can also trigger collective grief when many are grieving the same losses together, like after the tragedy of a mass shooting. This is a very quick summary of the more common types of grief. And the bottom line is there are many kinds of grief and not one right way to get through any of them. Through our time together, we will dive more into the various types of grief, and we'll be talking about things that are helpful and the things that are not helpful as well when we're navigating these different pathways, both as grievers and as we support those who are. We'll work on understanding grief and the various phases and the different ways that grief can show up in our lives. And we'll talk about tools for navigating the harder days, like coping with anniversaries and birthdays and the holidays. We'll talk about ways to honor our loved ones who've transitioned, and we'll also be discussing self-care, which is so important. And I'm sure we'll dive into mediumship and spirit communication, visitation as well. Mediumship is an amazing way to help soothe the pain of losing a loved one. Knowing they are still there and that they're paying attention to what's going on in our lives can often bring a level of peace and healing when the time is right. Some episodes like this one will be just me, though I hope most will also include you. Honored guests who choose to share their stories so we can come together to feel, support, and learn how to cope with difficult situations and the different kinds of grief that affect us all. I want to hear your questions as well, and I know that A1R Psychic Radio has a way to sign up to be a guest or to submit a question and that I can answer on the air here as well. So if it feels right for you, I hope you will choose to participate. One thing I know for sure is that when we connect, we heal. Even in listening to Anderson Cooper's podcast, he's not sharing any tips or tools. It's just a conversation, and you can see how healing that can be in every episode. We need to be able to talk about our grief and not feel like we need to swallow our words. We need to cultivate the spaces where our grief and our emotions are welcome. These spaces are important because if you're struggling with grief, it may not be appropriate to break out in crying and tears at work. It can put a strain on even the best of relationships when you are rightfully needing to talk about your grief again and again. It is part of the process, and it's how we heal. Part of the problem is we don't always have access to the spaces where our emotions are welcome, where our stories are welcome, and our grief is safely on display. Talking about it helps. It's not easy, but it does help. And it's also how we honor our loved ones who are no longer with us. Some people don't want to talk, and that's okay too. Others want people to continue mentioning them, saying their names, and keeping those memories at the surface. As I've said, there's no right way to process a loss or a right way to grieve. There are steps. We may have heard some of these before, especially around death and dying: anger, depression, bargaining, denial, acceptance. There's truth in these, and the order is not important. And it shouldn't be surprising that the stages of death and dying are also some of the stages of grief, along with meaning, honoring, and remembering. I like to share this image with you. If you can imagine a box with a square drawn on it and a red button on one side with the word that says pain. And inside, there's an enormous purple blob. It fills the entire square. Every thought, every move jiggles the blob and hits the pain button. Everything hurts and everything can be a trigger. And that very well may be where you are today, and that's okay. Over time, the big purple blob, and your blob may be a different color, and that's okay too, but your blob will get smaller. I promise you it will. And while the red pain button will always be there, not every move, not every thought will cause the purple blob to hit it. For today, your assignment is to draw your own box with your own red pain button and your any color blob, and ask yourself, how big is my blob today? Remember, grief is not linear, so your blob may be a different size on different days, and that's okay too. How big is your blob today? Whatever you're working through and whatever your loss, I welcome you to share it here. Each week, we'll have time for 1 to 2 guests, depending on the situation, and I would be so honored if you would be part of our journey. Whether you're here to feel less alone, to learn something new, or just hear a friendly voice, you're welcome here. You have a part to play too. Share what you're learning, share what you're hearing with others. I can only reach those of you who are here, tuning in, or watching the replay. You can reach those in your circles, who can reach those around them as well. And together we can really start to change the way people in our communities are dealing with and talking about grief. And if you are dealing with grief and you'd like to work with me, please know I would be honored to help. You can message me via Facebook or through my website is really the best way, and we can talk about what's going on and see if a grief education session is right for you. In any grief education session, we start by sharing about your loved one or the loss you're dealing with. A grief education session, like our time here, is a space where we can talk it out and we can build tools and sometimes even a little bit of homework to help you move through your grief journey with less trauma and more meaning. If you're struggling, if you're interested in setting up a session to see how it feels for you, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. So I want to thank you before we close. I want to thank you for being part of our mission to create a space for healing and positive change by starting some important conversations. Be sure to follow me on the socials. I'm not on Twitter or X, but you can find me live on my Facebook page on Mondays at 4:30 Eastern for channeled information and collective card readings for the week, where I share channeled information and a collective card reading to help us get through the week, along with individual oracle card readings as well. Videos are also posted on my YouTube channel. And for more information on my services and classes, such as unspooling your DNA or becoming an empowered empath, to be added to my email list, or to book your personal grief consultation, psychic mediumship, or hypnotherapy session, please be sure to visit my website at sharidworkinsmith.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to share it with your friends or anyone else you think could benefit from listening. I look forward to next week, where we will be welcoming our first guests, and I hope that will be you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for setting aside this time for you. Remember, your grief is not something to be fixed or a problem to be solved. It's part of you to be cared for and gently integrated into a new version of yourself, perhaps even a better one. You're not alone. And as my friend Elizabeth's son Sam recently shared, aren't we so lucky we can be together and we don't have to grieve alone? We're all in this together, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.